This Parsha Podcast is dedicated in honor of a very special bat mitzvah girl, Joelle Hannah Khorsandi, the daughter of my dear friend Parham Khorsandi, whose bat mitzvah is this week. We wish her a hearty Mazal Tov from the entire Parsha Podcast family. We hope it's a wonderful celebration and it's a wonderful entrance to a life of adulthood and, of course, of many wonderful occasions. A quick announcement before we begin. So it's production season. Yes, that's right. It's production season. You see, my wife, she works in an all-girls high school. There's a small all-girls high school here in Houston. And she teaches and she kind of runs a lot of the different things in the school. And every year they have like a play or a production. And they prepare for months and months in advance. They sell tickets and they rent out the JCC's theater. And they do this every year. And it's a nightmare for me. Because for weeks on end, there's practices every night. And there's all sorts of anxiety. Oh, the girls don't want to come to practice and they don't remember their lines. It's going to be a disaster. It's going to flop. Everyone's going to be there. It's just going to be a total debacle. And then, of course, it always ends up being amazing. But there's a lot of anxiety. I spoke to someone here in town, and his wife, she runs the other production in town. And he told me he also has trauma from these productions. And his idea was we should make a support group. The husbands of wives who are doing plays, who are doing productions. But we didn't do that quite yet. But it seems like the light is at the end of the tunnel. Because you see, next week on Tuesday, that's when the production actually is. So my wife broached the subject. So what's going to be exactly? You have your Parsha Podcast on Tuesday evening at 6 p.m. from the Torch Center on torchzoom.com. There's not a single girl in the entire neighborhood to babysit. So I offered to push the Parsha Podcast next week to Wednesday. I like to release it Wednesday night. So we'll do the Parsha Podcast recording on Wednesday. And then I'll have to finish the recording and quickly edit it so I can release it that night. But then I was the hero. I was the hero who swoops in to save the damsels in distress to make sure that there's someone to watch the kids during the production next week. A long way of saying that, please God, next week's Parsha Podcast will be on Wednesday evening, same time, instead of the usual Tuesday evening. Last week, we had a lovely trip to Los Angeles. It was a very special trip. I got to participate in my first cousin's wedding. It was a delightful, joyous, amazing, sensational wedding. Not only did we get to meet some Parsha Podcast listeners by the wedding, but lots of family. And it was delightful and it was enjoyable. Some family I haven't seen in many years, got to catch up. It was really amazing. And then on Wednesday, we had the podcast get-together. Alan and Ramona, they had amazing hospitality, set out refreshments and sushi, and it was a very lovely crowd, and everyone was so comfortable just milling about and chit-chatting. And I was thinking of, if I was a listener of the Parsha Podcast, and I was told on the Parsha Podcast that, we're having a get-together in your town, I probably wouldn't have the courage to say, I want to join, send me the address. But these people, they're just so gregarious and so comfortable with strangers. And we're sitting and we're chatting and drinking and people are eating. And then I see my friend Alan, the homeowner, and he's fiddling with his phone. And he has a mischievous look on his face. And he's positioning his phone. He's holding his phone so I can't see what he's doing. But I know he's up to some sort of chicanery. So there's a plan afoot. And suddenly, blasted on the speakers, he puts on the Parsha Podcast jingle. he actually saves it. And it's Parsha Podcast blasting. Really delightful. So funny. Everyone got a kick out of it. We had a lot of chit chat, maybe like 45 minutes or so. And then we had, it was supposed to be a short talk. And I started the talk. I said, do me a favor. Please, please, please feel free. If you have to get up, you want to go get some more sushi. Like, I'll feel bad if I'm kind of boxing you in, making you uncomfortable. So I was very happy that some of the participants were comfortable enough to get up and walk about, because it's a little painful. It's a little painful for Parsha Podcast listeners to hear a talk live. Because when you're listening to the podcast, you go walk around, you go walk your dog, you could be on your commute, you could do the dishes, you could prepare for Shabbos. And of course, you put it at 1.5, 1.75, 2.0 speed. You could pause if you want, rewind a little bit. It's very convenient. But then I'm sitting there and I'm speaking so slowly. And it's a lumbering speech because I'm speaking slowly. And it was supposed to be short, but I kind of got absorbed into the talk and it ended up being more than an hour. But I think it was good. People enjoyed it. It was a very fine presentation, in my opinion. It was an incredible evening. And I curated some of the responses that people had. So one participant said it was a magical night. That's it, like a high praise. And another participant said it was a great experience. And another participant said it was a truly special night and a delight. It was an excellent and informative presentation, a very special time, and a sensational, all capitalized letters, sheer. So I guess people enjoyed it, even though I was speaking really slowly. And we took a lovely group photo and I included it in the newsletter. So if you're not subscribed to the newsletter, you missed it. But if you want to be subscribed to future newsletters, send me an email, rabbiwolbe@gmail.com, or you can find the link in the show notes. But it was a real success, a smashing success. I think every time I go to LA, we have to do it again. We did one in the summer in Toronto, and we did one in LA, and I really enjoyed it. And I'm looking forward, please God, to more opportunities to study with y'all together on the Parsha Podcast and maybe live in person sometime soon. My email address is rabbiwolbe@gmail.com. Let's begin. It's Parsha's Terumah. And this is the beginning of a 5-parsha span whose primary subject is the tabernacle. So some of y'all are going to go into your hibernation mode. Wake me up after Passover. Better yet, when Leviticus is over. Once we start Numbers, I'll join. But most of y'all know that there's a lot of gems that are found here in these parshios. We have Terumah this week, Tetzaveh next week, Kisisa, Vayakra Pekude, and then we begin Leviticus, Vayikra Tzav. Well, those are all about sacrifices done in the tabernacle. And the Shemini, Parsha Shemini, the next parsha is about the inauguration of the tabernacle. Tazir B'Tzorah, those are more laws that relate in part to the tabernacle. The tabernacle is going to be a very central fixture in the Torah, but truly in the life of the nation. For hundreds of years, the epicenter of the nation will be the tabernacle. And after hundreds of years of service, it will be put away and archived and replaced by the permanent temple. The tabernacle, well, that's like a temporary temple. And then there's a permanent temple, first temple, for hundreds of years, the epicenter of Jewish life. It was destroyed, rebuilt 70 years later. The second temple, for 800 plus years, we had temples. For more than 1,000 years, we had a sanctuary for God in our midst. And every single day, multiple times, dozens of times, we pray for the restoration of this special thing that we had, a touch point between heaven and earth, a place where the presence of God was palpable for all. And it begins in our Parsha. And it marks a very important shift in the nation. God says, make for me a sanctuary, build a home, a domicile, a residence, a temple for me so I can dwell amongst you. And the Ramban has a fascinating introduction to our Parsha where he tells us that Sinai was a very important inflection point. The Almighty interfaced with us face to face, as it were, so to speak. And that was not a one and done, a smash and grab, a touch and go. Even though the Sinai revelation itself was a one-day event, there was a closeness that was forged at Sinai. And that closeness is perpetuated in the tabernacle. So the tabernacle, as it were, is a portable, mobile Sinai, a place where a degree, a measure, a modicum of the national revelation can be relived and re-experienced simply by visiting and experiencing the residence, the sanctuary of God. There's a very important midrash. We like to revisit this each year because it really places the whole subject of the tabernacle in perspective. You see, we just had Parshas Yisro. That was the Ten Commandments, the preparation for it, the aftermath. And then the last week's Parsha, Parshas Mishpatim, at the very end of the Parsha, it goes back to Sinai. And it talks about the run-up to Sinai, and the bond, and the pact, and the pledge, Na'aseh v'nishma, we will do and we will listen. And the blood pact, where the blood was actually sprinkled upon the nation to symbolize this permanent covenant that a nation, that people, the humans forged with God. And right away, right after that description, Moshe ascending to heaven, we talk about the tabernacle. They're connected, like the Ramban says. They're connected. There is a perpetuation of Sinai via the tabernacle. But the Midrash says a little wrinkle, very fascinating. The Midrash says that when God gave us his Torah, his most precious treasure, he came along. He's part of the package. And it gives this beautiful parable. There was a king who had a daughter, his only daughter, the apple of his eye, his jewel. And a prince came, and a prince wanted to marry her. And the prince was a worthy, suitable suitor, a suitable spouse. So they got married. And it was time for the prince and his princess and his wife to go back to the prince's hometown, to his castle, to his land. And the king told the prince, my daughter that I gave to you, your bride, she's my only daughter. I am incapable of being away from her, of being separated from her. So you're going to go to your land, but I can't possibly bear the thought of separating from my daughter. But I can't tell you that you can't take she's your wife after all. So I must allow you to take her home with you. So here's how we're going to resolve this. Do me a favor. Wherever you travel, have a small room where I can reside. So she'll be your wife, sure. You take her to your castle, sure. But make a little room for me so I can be close to my daughter. Similarly, the Almighty, he has a daughter, as it were. His precious treasure, the treasure that he used to create the world with, the treasure that was with him 974 generations before the world was created, the Talmud tells us. And he gave it to us. And when he gave it to us, it's no longer in the heavens. Torah's not in the heavens. But God says, it's inseparable from me. I can't part from my daughter. So you have the Torah, take it, but make from me a tabernacle. It's a package deal. You got the Torah, God comes along. The commentaries observe that we always read about the Parsha sections about the tabernacle, the fundraising for it, and the assembly of it, and the erection of the tabernacle. We always read that during the month of Adar, which today, of course, is Rosh Chodesh Adar. And the commentaries tell us that the word Adar, the way it's spelled is Aleph, and then a Dalet and a Resh. Dalet and Resh means dar, well, that means to dwell, to live, like a dirah, dwelling place. And Aleph symbolizes Almighty God. And it's no coincidence, the commentaries tell us, that we read about the dwelling place of God together with us in the tabernacle during the month of Adar, because the Almighty, the Adon, the Master of all, will dwell with us. And just today I heard a little addition, or maybe the opposite of that. There's a man, or there was a man, whose name was Agag, not Adar, Agag. So if the letter Aleph symbolizes God, and Dar means to dwell, God dwells with us, what does the word Gag mean? Gimel Gimel. Well, it means a roof, or a roof, as some people like to say. And that symbolizes that Agag was the king of Amalek. And he was one who says, there's a roof separating me and God. There's no way that we can dwell together. This is what's happening in our Parsha. God is saying, I will dwell amongst you. And it starts off with a Terumah, a fundraising effort. And it lists 15 different items that will be needed for the tabernacle, its vessels and vestments. Gold, silver, copper, blue wool, purple wool, red wool, linen, goat's hairs, reddened ram's skins, tachash skin. Tachash is that amazing animal that never was present beforehand or subsequently. It existed only for the time, or it was available only for the time of the tabernacle. Multiple colors. It's got only one horn. It sounds like a unicorn. Pretty amazing. Number 11, shittim wood, oil for illumination, spices for the anointing oil, and for the ketoros and for the incense. And finally, 14-15, the shoham stones and the miluim stones that would be used for the ephod, for the apron-like garment of the high priest. It had 2 shoulder pads upon which were etched the 12 names of the sons of Jacob. Those were the shoham stones and the 12 miluim stones that were inlaid in the brackets, in the spots, the voids, the holes in the golden breastplate, the choshen of the high priest. Now, if you look at the commentaries throughout the whole parsha, they're showing so much rich symbolism in every part of the tabernacle. Almost all the commentaries find different interpretations, different symbolisms in every part of the tabernacle. And Rabbeinu Bechaya has a very long essay where he says, well, there's 15 different items. Oh, that's not just a coincidental number. There's this example and that example and the angels and the heavens and amazing things. One thing he says is that the Talmud tells us that there are 2 worlds, this world and the next world, Olam Hazeh, this world, and Olam Haba, the world to come. And the Talmud tells us that God used the letter Hey, which is the number 5, to create this world. Because in this world, you're like inside the letter Hey, but there's this big hole, this chasm. There's no floor. You could fall out of it. You could sin. You could be lost. But there's also the possibility for repentance. There's this little window you could swim around, or you could levitate around and find your way back inside. This world is created with the letter Hey. And the world to come, well, that's created with the letter Yud. It's so small because only a small amount of people, a paucity of people, are eligible to be included in the afterlife in Olam Haba. So you put those 2 together, the Yud is 10, the Hey is 5, that's 15, and that symbolizes that the creation of the tabernacle is the recreation, as it were, of the world, of the universe, of multiple worlds, of this world and the world to come. And then we read about the ark. This is the first vessel mentioned in our Parsha. And it goes first, the commentaries tell us, because it symbolizes the essence of it all. In the ark will be the tablets, both the first set of tablets that will be shattered, and the second set, the intact set of tablets that Moshe got after beseeching God. And it's made of boxes. There's a gold box, and inside there's a wood box, and inside there's another gold box. Inside and outside it's gold. The wood is invisible. And inside that vacuum, you place that void, you place the tablets, and you cover it with the kaporos. On top of the kaporos, you have those golden cherubs, the keruvim. And around it all, you have a golden crown. And that symbolizes V'hu simin lekeser Torah, the Talmud tells us. It's a sign for the crown of Torah. And there are 3 crowns, if you are looking very carefully. There's a crown on the ark, and that symbolizes the crown of Torah. And there's a crown around the table, the shulchan, and that symbolizes the crown of the monarchy. And then in next week's parsha, we read about the golden altar, the Mizbeach Hazav, not to be confused with the copper altar in this week's parsha. The golden altar was almost exclusively for the incense. Only once a year Yom Kippur was it used for a blood service of a sacrifice, only on Yom Kippur, and that had a crown around that, and that symbolized the crown of the priesthood. But the ark, it was gold inside, and it was gold outside. And the Talmud tells us that this is emblematic of a Torah scholar. Just as the ark, which symbolizes the Torah sage, it's gold on the inside and on the outside, there is uniformity, there is parity between what's inside and what's outside. What the ark itself is essentially, that's invisible. And what it projects externally, gold on the inside, gold on the outside, that teaches us that a Torah scholar must be gold on the inside and on the outside. Must be the same outside as they are on the inside as they are on the outside. If the ark did not have the inner golden box, none of us would even know the difference. Because we don't open the cover of the ark. No one would see the lack of gold on the inside. Nevertheless, the ark had to be made gold on the inside and on the outside. They were once doing some work in my house, and they had to knock down some walls. And you never know what you find behind these walls. And the worker told me, I cannot tell you what I found behind some of these walls. Because some of the workers, they're like, okay, we'll put up the wall, but it doesn't matter. You'll never see it, right? So they knocked on a wall. And they found on the studs, on the horizontal part of the studs, an empty can of Dr. Pepper. This worker, he drank his Dr. Pepper, and he just put it there and just put the drywall, the sheetrock on top of it. And it's like an icky feeling, not just because it's so much sugar and so bad for you. It kind of feels wrong. If it feels improper. Now, I thought it was an aberration, but then they knocked on another wall and they found another Dr. Pepper. So there is some construction worker who, this is his signature. This is what he does. He drains the Dr. Pepper and places the empty can, instead of the hassle of putting it in the trash, places the empty can on the studs. And it just feels wrong. And the thought that there may be other Dr. Peppers hanging around here, it's kind of an icky feeling. But you don't see it. No, it's got to be gold on the inside and on the outside. I remember reading that Steve Jobs, he had a computer company. Between his first stint and his second stint at Apple, and he said it has to be beautiful on the inside as well. Like if you open up the whole machine, which unless you're fixing the machine, you wouldn't see it. You want it to be perfect and it should be gorgeous. Why? Because there's a certain value that on the inside, it should be beautiful as well, even though no one will ever see it. But here, the Torah is telling us something else over here. The Torah is telling us that a Torah scholar who's beautiful on the outside, everything that someone else can see, golden. On the inside, it's wood. It's not perfect. Not quite the same. It's not just an aesthetic problem. Torah is meant to transform a person, to uplift them, to take them from being someone who is moved and maybe even dominated by their instincts, by their impulses, by their whims, to take someone who could be animalistic and turn them into a veritable angel. That's the objective of Torah. And we see examples of people that had great external manifestations, if you will, of righteousness, but inside they were corrupt. They were rotten. Now, the classic example of this is Esav. Esav, he does everything to externally mimic his father. My father got married at 40, I'll do the same. And he's like the pig, as they just tell us, who projects his split hooves to give off the impression, look, I'm kosher, I'm holy, I'm righteous. And that's a problem, because if someone has Torah but doesn't have that internal refinement, then effectively they are misappropriating, misusing the Almighty's gift. Inside, their character, their desires, their things that no one else can see, their fear of heaven, that must be golden as well. The Torah must be applied. And the Talmud goes on to say about a Torah scroll that's not the same inside and out. It says it's a terrible thing. In a few different ways it says that. And then one of the sages says, don't even study Torah if you're not going to allow it to be absorbed within. Because then you'll just have Gehenna twice. Because you're going to deny yourself all the things the Torah prohibits in this world. But you get to the next world, and because the Torah didn't penetrate at all, you have nothing to show for it. The Talmud concludes, Torah is an elixir. And it could be an elixir of life when applied properly, but it could be a sam hamavas, a potion of death. So we see this incredible value where the Torah should not be something which is only superficial. If it is, it's a problem. That's not real Torah. It's better, maybe even be better off not studying it. You got to be inside and outside the same. Whatever you study, whatever you learn, whatever you encounter, whatever you project should be a reflection of who you actually are. Now, there's a fascinating episode in the Talmud that I was, I think it's pertinent to this subject, but it's also a sharp question. It's one of the most dramatic and fascinating episodes in the Talmud, and it's a very significant event in our history. Right after the temple was destroyed, the sages were in a city called Yavne. That's where all the sages were coalesced. You remember the story? Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, he meets the Emperor Vespasian when he was still the general Vespasian. He gets smuggled out of the city, and he wows the general, and the general grants him 3 wishes. And one of the wishes is, Tenli Yavne v'chachameh. Give me the city of Yavne and its sages. Spare that city. So all the sages were gathered in the city of Yavne, and the leader of the sages, the descendant of Hillel, the Nasi, the president or the prince of the Sanhedrin, was Rabban Gamliel. And he had a few altercations of sorts with someone who was a greater sage, but wasn't the titular head of the nation. His name was Rabbi Yehoshua. There's one episode that had a dispute, which day was Rosh Chodesh, therefore which day was Yom Kippur, and he said, you have to come to me on the day that you think is Yom Kippur with your staff, with your money pouch. Don't question or challenge the ruling of the Sanhedrin. But then there was another event that the Talmud recounts. There was a discussion amongst some of the sages if the evening prayers, the night prayers, is that optional or is that obligatory? So one of the students came to Rabbi Yeshua and he said to him, is it optional or is it obligatory? And he said, well, it's optional. And that same student went to Rabbi Gamliel and asked him the same question, is the evening prayers, is it optional or is it obligatory? And he says it's obligatory. So we have a dispute. Rabbi Yeshua said it's optional and Rabbi Gamliel said it's obligatory. So the student tells Rabbi Gamliel, wait, But Rabbi Yeshua told me it's optional. So he says, you wait till we have the gathering of the Torah sages in the academy. They have this lecture. The Nasi, the prince, is giving the lecture. And the student gets up and asks the question, is the evening prayers, is it optional or is it obligatory? So Rabbi Gamliel, who's giving the lecture, he's orating, he says it's obligatory. And then he stands the crowd. Is there anyone amongst you sages who argues with this ruling? Now, sitting in the crowd is Rabbi Yeshua, but he doesn't say anything. He didn't want to publicly disagree with Rabbi Gamliel. So Gamliel says, Rabbi Yeshua, do you disagree with this? He says, no, I'm not disagreeing. So he tells him, wait, Rabbi Yeshua, I heard someone say that you said it's optional. So you evidently disagree. Stand up. You're not being testified upon. So Rabbi Yeshua he responded. He says, I cannot contest what that student said. And so we see there's a dispute here about a law, but there's also the leader, the official head of the people, is going to kind of teach everyone a lesson about not challenging the authority of the office of the Nasi of the prince. So he tells him to stand, and then he continues his lecture. He's giving the lecture, and the rabbi is still standing. And the people get very uncomfortable with this. They disapprove, and they start talking amongst themselves. It's a disgrace to Rabbi Yeshua to make him stand. And finally, they said it's not appropriate. Rabbi Gamliel is going too far, and they make a public protest. And they tell the amplifier, what's the amplifier? You have a room without a microphone. So they used to have people with big booming voices. And the great rabbi would speak to that person, and they would say word for word what the rabbi said to them in their ear. It's I think of it as like a human microphone, a human amplifier. So they tell the human amplifier, stop, we're not listening anymore. Protest. How long is Rabbi Gamliel made Rabbi Yeshua suffer? He made him suffer on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur to come with his walking stick and his money pouch. And there's another episode which the Talmud does not elaborate upon. And now he's making him stand. It's a disgrace. Let us remove Rabbi Gamliel from his position as Nasi, as prince. They make a motion to depose the great sage from his position, the great sage who is from the most prestigious family, who is a direct descendant of Hillel, and they fire him. And they have a discussion, who should we appoint in his stead? Rabbi Yeshua may have been the most worthy, but they thought that would be too much of an affront to Rabbi Gamliel, because he was the actual person that triggered, he was the catalyst of this firing of Rabbi Gamliel. So they said, you know what, maybe the worthiest candidate is Rabbi Akiva, but he doesn't have that background, that pedigree that we would need. So they settled, or they agreed to appoint a wild card candidate, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. He had all the qualifications needed. He was wise. Any question you ask him, he can answer it. He was rich. If he needs to pay homage to the Romans, he could do it. And he comes from the most prestigious family. He's a 10th generation descendant of Ezra the scribe. So they go to Rabbi ben Azariah and say, we're firing Rabbi Gamliel as the leader of the academy, and you are going to be appointed. Do you want the job? So he says, you know what? It's what he says. Let me go talk it over with my family. I'm going to discuss it with my wife. So his wife says to him, I don't understand. They fired Rabbi Gamliel. They're going to appoint you. What will happen to you? They'll fire you as well. This is not a job with job security. Maybe they'll dispense with you They'll depose you like they deposed Rabbi Gamliel. And he said to them, yeah, that's true. That's a risk. But if you have an opportunity to serve in this great office, even if it's for only a day, you take the opportunity. He says to her, if you have an expensive goblet, you can use it only once. Tomorrow it may shatter, sure. But I can use it today, I'm going to use it today. And then she said to him, but you don't have the look. Your hair is all jet black. And Mercedes tell us, this candidate to replace Rabbi Gamliel, he was only 18 years old. He was a teenager. I took my son Shlomo. We did a little father-son bonding yesterday. I took him to the range. Haven't gone to the range in a long time, many years. Had to get my piece oiled. But I said to him, Shlomo had an amazing time. He loved it. But this is America, right? I was explaining to him, we have the First Amendment, and then we have the Second Amendment. The British said we can't have guns, and the Americans said, the revolutionaries said, the patriots said, we're going to have as many guns as we want. And I said, how many guns are there in America? More than 500 million. More is about 1.5 guns per person in this great country. So we're looking at, he's like, so I asked the guy there at the range after we shot. I said, like, what is it? Like, if you want to buy, like, there's this, you can buy whatever you want, right? He says, yeah, all you need is we just do a little paperwork and that's it. I said, oh, how old do you have to be? So he says, you got to be 21. Not even 18. You got to be 21. They appointed a sage to lead the entire nation, 18 years old. No white hair. His wife says, sorry, you don't have the look. You don't have any white hair. So a miracle happened. And his hair turned white. And that's why in the Haggadah, when Rabbi Mazar is quoted, he says, behold, I am like a 70-year-old. He wasn't 70 years old, he was 18. But he looked like a 70-year-old person. And indeed, he replaced Rabbi Gamliel. And the Talmud describes what happened on that day, the first day of the new administration. There was a guard who used to protect the entrance of the academy. And he wouldn't give permission to anyone to enter. You had to be worthy to enter. There was a rule that Rabbi Gamliel instituted, and it's the exact same words the Talmud says about the ark. You have to be, your inside has to be like your outside. Just like the ark, it was rolled on the inside, it was rolled on the outside. Rabbi Gamliel had a rule, the students of the academy, only those who are like they are on the inside, they are on the outside, like they are on the outside, they're on the inside, only those students are allowed to enter. And on that day, they changed the rules. They switched the admission criteria for students in the academy. Whoever wants to come study, come study. You know, today, like, we're begging people, come learn, come study, listen to the Parsha Podcast. They used to have a rule. A guard standing by the door, unless you're, like you are on the outside, you are on the inside, the outside, they match. Only then are you eligible. They would send everyone else away. The day they changed the admission criteria, they had to add more benches. How many benches did they have to add? One opinion says it was 400 benches. And the second opinion says it was 700 benches. And when Rabbi Gamliel, when he saw this, he saw the enormous crowds joining the academy. He was sad. He was disheartened. Maybe my strict rules prevented all these people from studying. And he had a dream that night. And in the dream, he saw white jars, but they were filled with ashes. Nothing inside of them. And that dream was calming him down. Don't worry, these students, they look nice on the outside, but these 400 or 700 backbenchers, they're loafers. They're not serious. But Talmud tells us that dream was just to assuage his bad feelings. Truth is, they were worthy. And the Talmud continues, that was a very important day. There's a whole book of Talmud that was all authored on that day. And every time it says in the Mishnah the words Bo Bayom, on that day, well, which day? It's this day, the first day of the new administration. There was not a single question or dilemma that went unresolved. It was an enormous festival, a bazaar of Torah. And the Talmud concludes, there was one person that you wouldn't expect to be there. Imagine you're fired from your job. The CEO gets fired. He doesn't show up the next day to work the cafeteria or to be a middle manager. It's like John Quincy Adams. After he was president, he went back to the House of Representatives to be a congressman. You don't see that very often. You reach the peak, you don't go back, you don't take a lower role. It's an insult. I'm going to go write my memoirs. But imagine you were fired from the job, and all the people that are in this academy, they all fired you. All of us would be grumpy and would be upset, maybe open a competing academy down the street. No, he went the next day. He accepted it. Went back the next day as part of the ordinary ranks of sages. Anyhow, amazing story. Lots of different points of investigation. Maybe the most interesting question is, how would the guard at the door know who to admit and who to send away? How do you know if someone's inside and outside match? But regardless, we see a very interesting discovery in this Talmud. Rabbi Gamliel, the old guard, and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, the new guard, they had different admission criteria. According to Rabbi Gamliel, you had to be ark-like. Inside and outside must match. And Elazar ben Azariah says, even if you're not ark-like, you can be admitted. And 400 or 700 benches had to be added to the academy. And it seems to us that Rabbi Gamliel is correct. We have a model for Torah. It's the ark. And it's gold on the inside and on the outside. And if it was any other way, it would be not an accurate representation of Torah. And the Talmud says that, actually, no, he was wrong. The correct approach is to open the Torah for everyone, to admit students even though they are not ark-like. I was thinking just how to resolve this. I came up with a few different ways to frame it. But you let me know what you think. Send me an email, rabbi@wolbachim.com. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, his wife said to him, look at you. Look at the mirror. You're a kid. You don't have any white hairs. You don't have the august, prestigious, noble bearing. You're not a candidate for the job that you've been offered. But what happened? He accepted the role. He assumed the role. And with the assumption of the role came the worthiness for that role. He became worthy. And you could even add a little wrinkle. Inside, he was obviously worthy of being the leader of the people. It's just that his external bearing didn't match. So his inside and his outside, they achieved parity because he accepted that role. With the assumption of the role of prince came the worthiness for it. Came the stature, the distinguished and refined countenance and bearing. So maybe, just maybe, someone's not worthy. But they come to the academy. And the academy is for those who are worthy, but they join the academy. With their entrance to the academy comes their worthiness. I was thinking maybe of another way to frame this. If someone is not refined, their inside and their outside, they don't match. What's the solution to that? We got to give them Torah. Yeah, of course. Duh, they're not perfect. Duh, they need to improve. How do you improve? You come to the academy. The end goal, when you're done, you got to be ark-like. When you come in, you're a work in progress. That's the ark. Following the ark, we have the table. It too is adorned with a golden crown. On the table, on the shulchan, were dishes in which the showbreads, the lechem hapanim, were baked or were stored each week. And then we read about the menorah, a candelabra hewn from a single block of gold. It had intricately embellished branches with the decorative cups and almond embellishments and knobs and flowers. And of course, we've spoken about this many times in the past. Moshe couldn't visualize it. God showed him an image of a menorah in the fire. He still couldn't make it. God told him, put it into the fire, and it emerged. So many fascinating different characteristics of the menorah. And the Parsha delineates the covers, the urios, the exquisitely embroidered covers of the tabernacle. There's the Mishkan, which is the name of the tabernacle is the Mishkan, and one of the names of the covers is also called the Mishkan. And that's made of 10 panels, and there's a yarn of linen and blue and purple and red wool, and there's 10 panels, each of 28 by 4 cubits, and how they're attached and how they're hooked together. That's one cover. Then there's the ohel, that's made of goat hair, and that's 11 panels, and that's 30. Each panel is 30 by 4. And then you have 5 and 6 panels that are connected. And then there's the third, or maybe third and fourth. There's a dispute. Are there a total of 4 covers or only 3? Either there is one more of reddened ram skins and another one of tachash skin, or maybe there's only one more that was half reddened ram's skins, and the other half was of tachash skins. And then I read about the beams. Those are the vertical wooden walls of the Mishkan. Each one of them was 10 amos tall. Think about that. An amma is like at least 1.8 feet. So it's at least 18 feet tall, maybe 20 feet tall. Massive. And describes exactly the positioning of the beams. And then the silver sockets beneath each beam. And on top, there were the golden rings. And they had the horizontal supporting bars. And the magical one, the brech hatichon that snaked through them. And we were the parochas, the curtain separating the 2 chambers of the tabernacle, the Holy of Holies from the sanctuary. And then there's the curtain at the entrance of the tabernacle. And there's the altar. This is the outer altar, also known as the copper altar. And then there's the dimensions and the makeup of the tabernacle's courtyard. A lot to cover. I want to focus on one point. It's interesting. The name of the Parsha is Terumah. What does Terumah mean? It means a gift, a donation. Take from me a Terumah. And Rashi observes this. It says the word Terumah 3 times. There's different types of gifts. I tried this morning with my students. I said, well, what does the word Terumah mean? So we had 2 students. One said, it's a donation for the Mishkan, for the tabernacle. And the other one said, well, it's a tithe that you give to the priest. And I said, you're both right. You're both right. And that's a great mystery. Because the word Terumah, in every other context, means it's the first of the tithes. You give a tithe to the Kohen, and only then do you give the tithe to the Levite. How much is the tithe of the Terumah to the Kohen? So sages tell us there's 4 different amounts. The tithe to the Levite, it's 10%. The word tithe, the word maaser means 10, 1 of every 10. But the Terumah, it's not quite a tithe, it's not 10%. It's something else. Well, how much is it? So sages tell us, if you have an enormous field, 5,000 acres of grain, you produce a gargantuan crop. And you decide that you want to discharge your Terumah responsibilities with a single stalk of grain. one kernel can discharge the obligation of the entire field. Now, of course, no one would actually do that. So there's 3 other measurements. If someone's very generous, they give 1/40th. Every 40 units, they give 1 to the Kohen. If someone's more miserly, they give 1/60th. And the average is 1/50th. It's 2%. That's the Terumah. And our parsha is called Parshas Terumah. And it's a totally different subject. It's not a tithe given each year to the Kohen. It's something very specific for the Tabernacle. And he uses the same term. And that should raise some eyebrows. Now, the Talmud gives us a funny story. There was a heretic. And the heretic came to the great rabbi and said to him, your God is a Kohen, is a priest, because the verse says that he got Terumah. He got donations, but the word Terumah means what you give to the priest. So how did your God bury Moshe? And how did it become pure? Because a Kohen, can't come into contact with the dead. If they do, they have to have a process of the red heifer and so on. God didn't go to the mitzvah. That was the question that the heretic asked the great rabbi. So it's kind of a silly question. Because we know the word Terumah, in our context, it's not about giving 2% to the Kohen, it's about fundraising for the Tabernacle. But the Talmud kind of acknowledges it. It records this narrative between the heretic and the great rabbi. And not only does it record the question, it records the answer. The sage told him, God immersed, as it were, not in a mikvah of water, but in a mikvah of fire. Okay, it's a very strange dialogue, and Rashi interprets this exchange as being a silly question that really doesn't deserve a response, but he was responding even though it was nonsensical, but it is an interesting observation nonetheless. The term Terumah, the name of our parsha, the eponymous term of our parsha, for fundraising for the Mishkan, it's the same as a priestly tithe of 1/50th. So the Baal HaTurim, one of the great commentators, he says, we know that Temple Mount, very large, but only a small percentage of Temple Mount was actually reserved for the actual temple. What percentage of Temple Mount was covered with the actual temple? So Sages tell us it was 2%. 2%. A 50th. Terumah is a 50th, and the Tabernacle is also a 50th to indicate or to symbolize the fact that it's a 50th of the Temple Mount. I want to suggest a different idea. The number 50, as we know, it's a very significant number in our philosophy. We had last week, there's the 50th year, the Jubilee cycle. That'll appear many times yet in the Torah. There's the 7, and then there's the super 7, 7 of 7. And beyond that, what's beyond 7 of 7? That's 50. That's like the most supernatural. The Talmud tells us there are 50 gates of wisdom. And 49 of them were given to Moshe. The 50th was not given to Moshe. Now, what is this 50th gate of wisdom? What's this level that's beyond Moshe? So, many people wouldn't know the answer to that question. I wouldn't know the answer to the question either. But there happens to be an essay by Ramban to answer this question. This is actually his introduction to his commentary to the Torah. And he says that level 50, that's the knowledge of God himself. So Moshe was given 49, which is all of Torah, all the other wisdoms, but knowledge of God himself was not given. That's what the Ramban says. So I want to maybe speculate an idea with your permission here. God gave us everything. He took all of Torah and vacated it from heaven. Torah is no longer in the heavens, and gave it to us. 49 levels. But God held something back, as it were. He gave us the Torah, but he didn't give us himself. Level 50th was not given to us. And then we have the Terumah. What's Terumah? Terumah is that last 2%. It's a 2% that's not ours. And the Midrash tells us that God said, I gave you the Torah. It's like my daughter. I come with it. God gave Moshe 49 out of 50. 98%. And God says, okay, you want the last 2%? That 50th level? This is what you need to do. Terumah. This is how you get the Terumah. V'yitchu li Terumah. Take me as a Terumah. The Torah, it just tells us, it's like the daughter of God. And at Sinai, we wedded the daughter. God gave it to us. And now, as it were, so to speak, we're getting the father as well. At Sinai, we got almost everything. But it wasn't quite everything. There was something missing. And now we're getting the full package. Take me as Terumah. The 50th is now available. Now, to me, this teaches us of some very powerful ideas. For one, the fact that it's called Terumah, meaning the 50th, it's focusing that term on the fundraising. I mean, if someone contributes towards this, they're opening up the possibility for a permanent and direct relationship at an even higher level than Sinai with the Almighty. But also, what this means is that when the temple was extant, like we said, it was around for, the Tabernacle was around for hundreds of years, then we had the first temple, second temple, and so on. There's a very different relationship that we have with Torah when we have a temple versus when we don't have a temple. Because do we have the father with the daughter, as it were, or not? Is the father, as it were, in our midst or not? Which is why, when we end off our prayers every day, we have a prayer. May it be the will before you. Sheyabane Beis Hamikdash. The temple should be rebuilt. And then we say, V'sein chalkeinu b'sorosecha, and give us our portion in your Torah. It's incomparable when the Torah is accompanied by God being in our midst. But I want to suggest another idea. We're doing something to summon, as it were, the presence of God. It's an outrageous proposition in our Parsha. Beautifully true, but take this 50th. You can take it. And what do? We have these 15 different items, and we're building all these different things. We're following the exact prescription, the exact directives. And by the way, at the end of these 5 parshios, the presence of God entered the tabernacle. But when we study all these different items and what we're making out of them, we find some very fascinating things. So one of those 15 items is the atzei shittim woods. So Rashi has 2 comments about these shittim woods. 25:5. Where do they get these woods? And they're in the desert, in the wilderness. Each beam has got to be 18 feet tall. And you need scores of them. Where are you finding that in the wilderness? So Rashi cites the Midrash. They weren't from the wilderness. They have a long history. Jacob, our forefather, he foresaw prophetically. Remember, Jacob passed away 193 years before the Exodus. So the tabernacle was built 193 years after the passing of Jacob. But Jacob foresaw prophetically that in the future, Israel will build a tabernacle in the wilderness. And he brought these trees down to Egypt when he went down to Egypt. And he planted them there. And he instructed his sons, when they leave Egypt during the Exodus, don't forget this wood. You're going to need it. That's the comment Rashi offers to 25:5. In 26, 15, when it talks about the actual construction of those beams, the verse does not say you should make beams. Rather, it says you should make the beams. Vasisa es hakarashim, the beams. So Rashi asks the question, wait a minute. It should have said, and you should make beams. Everything else it says, you should make this, you should make that. Why say the beams? So Rashi again tells us, these are very specific beams. From the beams that are ready, that were prepared, were designated for this purpose. Jacob planted these trees in Egypt. And when he died, he commanded his descendants, to take them out of Egypt when they depart. And he told them, the Almighty in the future will command you to make a tabernacle in the wilderness. And he's going to ask for shittim wood. Make sure they're ready. Now, we discover that these trees, this wood has an even earlier backstory. Where did Jacob himself get that wood from? The Midrash tells us that Abraham planted an orchard in Beersheba. And he would use these trees to help with the passerby. I don't know if it was for food or for shade, but this was what Abraham planted in Beersheba. And the Midrash says that Jacob got this wood, he sourced the wood from that orchard. You remember that middle bar that snakes through the body of the beams? According to one opinion, that too came from what Abraham planted. There's yet another opinion. This is a midrash cited in the Das Zakenim. That bar that went into one side of the tabernacle and snaked through the inside of the beams, and then it turned a corner, and it was one piece, one bar that went all the way around the whole thing. It's the exact same wood that Jacob took with him when he escaped from Esav. And at the end of the story, he says, I crossed over the Jordan with this stick. That stick is the Brechatichon, is that middle bar. So we see like the whole frame of the tabernacle, it comes from our illustrious ancestors, from Abraham, from Abraham's orchard, from Jacob planting the foresight to plant it, from Jacob's self-sacrifice to follow his parents, and when he was at his low point, pursued by Eliphaz, when he had nothing, he had that. And he had a plan, he had a vision for the tabernacle. Now, covering the frame of the tabernacles is the covers. And there's either 3 or 4 covers, different opinions. And the Midrash tells us that the lower cover, that corresponds or that represents one of the ancestors. And then the middle cover represents another one of the ancestors. And the top cover represents a third of the ancestors. The one made of goat hair, that symbolizes, or that's corresponding to Jacob. Because Jacob, he put on a garment of goat hair when he was impersonating his brother. And the one with ram skins, that corresponds to Isaac. Because you remember Isaac, by the binding of Isaac, there was a ram whose horn was trapped in the thicket, in the brambles. And the Tachash cover, that corresponds to Abraham. Why? Because the word Tachash appears only a few times in all of Tanakh. And in one place, in Ezekiel chapter 16, verse 10, it says, Ve'anolcha Tachash, I'll make a shoe out of Tachash. And we know, Abraham, he said to the king of Sodom, I'm not going to take, not a string, and not a shoelace. Oh, and therefore the Tachash cover, that corresponds to Abraham. This is all a long way of saying that the tabernacle has a very ancient history. The forefathers of this great nation who passed away hundreds of years before the tabernacle was initiated. And the tabernacle is the actualization of the relationship forged by the ancestors, by the forefathers, by the patriarchs. So if we find that the presence of God is going to come into this house, into this sanctuary, why is that? It's in the merit of the glorious, illustrious progenitors of this people. That said, there was something that the Israelites themselves needed to do. We have a fundraising drive, and it's all optional. If someone says, I don't want to give any gold, they're fine. You're not expected to do it. It's only if you have the complete dedication of your heart. You don't want to give your wool? I want my wool. Okay, no problem. Nothing wrong with that. But the first verses of our Parsha, they say the word Terumah, a donation, 3 times. V'yikhu li Terumah, tikhu es Terumasi, v'zos ha-Terumah. 3 times. This is the word Terumah. And Rashi says there were actually 3 different drives. There was one of them, Beka la Golgos, a coin, a silver coin for every skull. And that was not optional. That was obligatory. And that was used to make the adonim, to make the silver sockets. There was one part of the entire fundraising effort that was mandatory. Every single Jew gave a coin, and that was melted into the silver sockets that went under the beams, the wooden beams. Between the beams and the ground were the silver sockets. I want to suggest something dramatic is happening here in the Parsha. God is saying, I'm going to leave the heavens, as it were. I'm going to come dwell amongst you. I'm not going to depart my daughter and be with you. I'm going to give you that 50th level. How is the nation recently released slaves from Egypt? How are they worthy of this? They're not. This is the actualization of all the hard work, of all the self-sacrifice, of all the righteousness, of the kindness, of the goodness, of the planning, of the foresight, of the effort of the ancestors. But every Israelite said, I'm going to make like a little receptacle. I'm going to be a little socket. I'll be low to the ground, sure. But I'll be a little socket in which I will hold up the great wooden framework of the tabernacle of our ancestors. When everyone said, I'm going to do a little bit to be a receptacle, to be someone who could absorb, who could hold in their hands, as it were, the dedication, the hard work, the sacrifice, the martyrdom, the righteousness of the ancestors, then the nation themselves became worthy of that tremendous blessing. I think this is a very powerful insight. We come from very glorious, righteous people. And it's possible for us to kind of actualize what they started. And none of us are anywhere near Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We're not. We're nothing compared to them. How can an Israelite merit to be the one to have this tremendous blessing? To be the one that has God in their midst? Well, of course, the credit goes to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Sure. If you just say, I'm going to open up my hands and say, I want to hold some of that blessing. I want to absorb. I want to be a receptacle to that, have that blessing. Then you're making yourself worthy of absorbing and being the vessel in which that blessing can be actualized. It's here. It's Parsha Terumah. And we're starting a whole world here. The world's changing. The world's changing. The Almighty is saying, I'm going to depart the heavens, as it were. I want to be with you and with my daughter, the Torah that I gave you. By the way, we still have that daughter. And just as God said, I can't depart from her, that's still true. Whenever we study Torah, we're summoning, as it were, the presence of God. Talmud tells us, from the day the temple was destroyed, there's no place, there's no receptacle, there's no domicile in this world for God, with the exception of the 4 cubits of Torah study. When someone studies Torah, the Almighty is with them. If it's a group, the Almighty is really there. What privilege we have to study the Almighty's Torah and to have a little bit, a little shade, a little scintilla of the experience in the Tabernacle that we hope will be rebuilt in its full glory very, very soon. And then the Torah will be quite incomparable indeed. I appreciate you listening to this edition of the Parsha Podcast. Always a joy and a privilege and a pleasure. From the Torah Center in Houston, Texas, my name is Yaakov Wolbe. The image says rabbiwolbe.com. I look forward to your questions and comments and your feedback. And of course, have a magnificent rest of your day. And amazing, terrific, splendid, sensational, meaningful, uplifting, and powerful Shabbos are coming. And please, God, we'll talk again very, very soon in good health and in great spirits. And again, the email address is rabbiwolbe@gmail.com.